So if you ask Ryan, you'll find out that I plan everything out, and he has started to beg me not to, because nothing I ever plan goes according to plan. So I don't know if anybody out here is like that or not. So when I think about my story, this verse comes to mind. It's from Proverbs 3. It starts in verse 5, and this is the Message version. And what God's always been trying to teach me is trust God from the bottom of your heart. Don't try to figure out everything on your own. Listen for God's voice in everything you do, everywhere you go. He's the one who will keep you on track. Don't assume you know it all. And so something that happened that I know some of you know this story, but I don't know that I've ever told the whole story. Something that happened to us back in 2004 is what really, anytime I wonder why things aren't going according to plan, I've learned to trust God. When Nathaniel was a baby, we were living with my mom and dad, and Ryan got a really great paying job, working 7 days a week, got overtime, and so we were able to move into our own house. And we were there, and things were going great, and he was through a temporary agency, and they had told him they were going to hire him full time, awesome benefits, vacation days, keeping the money coming. And we had only been there a couple of months when he walked into work, and they're like, oh, didn't you get the phone call? Everybody's been laid off. They're closing it down. And I was so upset and angry that we had just moved into this house and had everything planned out. And this was how things were going to go. And so he was going to school at the time, so he was applying for jobs left and right, and they were all evening time jobs because he was going to school during the day. Didn't get any callbacks at all. It was just like he had a mark on him, like there was no interest whatsoever, and we couldn't understand. And he got an employment, but it wasn't nearly what he was making at the factory job. So, a few months go by, and then it's February of 2004. He'd been laid off since October, and I got sick. I wasn't feeling good. We didn't have insurance. I went to the doctor. They tried to make sure that, they got me out of there having to pay the least amount of money as possible, told me I had a bladder infection, gave me some antibiotics, thought that was it. And then a couple of nights after that, he had come home from school. I had actually felt a little bit better that day, ironically, and we had fixed supper, and then it was about 10 o'clock that night. And all of a sudden, I just got super sick, started hurting really, really bad, couldn't stand up, was throwing up. Ryan was trying to walk me to the other bathroom. I thought maybe if I took a bath for some reason that would help. I don't know what was going through my mind. And I just wake up, and he's just yelling at me, and I didn't know what was going on. I was upset. I was like, why are you yelling at me? And he's like, you're in the floor. So he gets me up, and he decides to take me to the emergency room. We get there, and for whatever reason, they didn't seem too concerned, but I passed out again going through the door. So that got me into a wheelchair and back into the emergency room a whole lot quicker than if I would have had to wait in the triage. So passed out again. And a nurse came in, and she had this theory that I was passing out because I had thrown up. I'd never heard of that, but whatever. And apparently I was a little bit goofy and couldn't even answer the questions the doctor was asking me. I was like, I was taking these antibiotics, but I wouldn't talk to them. I'd only talk to Ryan. He tells me all this because I don't really remember much of it. But they still just weren't that concerned, we'll figure out what's going on. So they take me for ultrasound because they come back to like, well, we've done some blood work, and it turns out that you're pregnant. And I was like, oh, okay. And they did the ultrasound, and they said, we've called your doctor to come in. And I said, okay. And next thing you know, my doctor comes in his scrubs with his surgical team. And they had discovered that I had an ectopic pregnancy, which had ruptured, and I was bleeding to death. And so they rushed me into surgery. Surgery kind of got complicated because it turns out, because I like to do things the complicated way, I also had an ovarian cyst the size of a softball that ruptured at the same time. So they lost me during the surgery, but they brought me back. I lost a lot of blood, so my heart did stop, but they got me back, and miraculously, I survived all that. And at that time, if Ryan had gotten a single job that he had applied for, or if he was still working the job that he lost, he would have came home and I would have been dead in the floor. there's no way I could have gotten myself up and gotten out the door because I didn't even realize what was wrong. At the hospital, if I had not have passed out and going through the door, I likely would have bled out in the waiting room. The doctor, my doctor, and he's a Christian, they called him and said, we're going to call you back and tell you if we think that you need to come. So when they had left my room, they were going to go call him, but he said, I just had a funny feeling. He had already decided to come with his surgical team. And he said, I wouldn't have lived the other 10 minutes it would have taken for him to get there if he would have waited on the emergency room. So that's just, one of those things where nothing was going according to my plan and I was upset and angry, but I wouldn't be here today if any of those things had worked out the way I wanted them to, And because of that, we had a lot of struggles being able to have another child. We actually lost another child 6-7 years after that. And then a year later, we got pregnant with Nicole. And so all of those hard times, wondering why, I couldn't have another baby even though I really wanted one, being upset, now I look at Nicole, what would I do without her? It was never my plan to have children 8 years apart. But, I wouldn't go back and change it for anything. And so, when things don't go according to plan, I've learned just to take a deep breath and just remember that God's working all things for your good. Now, there's plenty of stories where I can't tell you why things happened a certain way. I don't have a God moment for that. It was just a bad time. But I still trust God. And, one time I heard a quote from Lou Giglio. He says, sometimes you can think of a better way for things to happen. What if, I hadn't had that ectopic pregnancy? Why couldn't it have been like that? Why couldn't, God just stop those bad things from happening? And he said, that's fine for when you have your own universe. But for right now, this is God's universe. And so he gets to do things his way. And so just if you're like me and you're a planner and things just don't go according to plan, just remember that God has a purpose and a plan for everything in your life.
Amen. Thank you, Sarah.